Hello, and welcome to Objective Health. I'm your host, Doug. With me today are Elliot, Erica, and Tiff.
Hello.
And
Hello.
in the background, as usual, is Damien on the
Hello.
wheels of steel,
Yo yo.
the ones and twos,
Yeah yeah.
controlling ting.
Word.
So today we are going to be talking about stevia. Most people at this point, I think, know what stevia is. At least anybody who's remotely interested in holistic health in some way. It's been around for years as the often referred to as kind of the best non sugar sweetener or non caloric sweetener. It's a natural plant that has natural sweet qualities to it, but doesn't contain carbohydrate, at least not excessive amounts of carbohydrate. Um, but what caught our attention and thought that maybe we should do a show on this was there was a Mercola article up recently talking about how GMO stevia is everywhere. The name of the article on Mercola.com was called Buyer Beware, GMO Stevia is Everywhere. So looking at this article was kind of interesting because it kind of serves as a bit of a jumping off point just to talk about stevia. Because I think, especially when people are kind of going onto low carb regimens, they're looking for things they can use to get that sweet taste that they're used to without pumping the carbs up and getting themselves knocking
Mhm.
themselves out of ketosis or something like that. But I think a lot of people, well, myself and I think most of the hosts here included, kind of became disenchanted with stevia after a while for various reasons. Um,
Yeah.
One being
Tastes
that
like
a lot of people
crap.
just, yeah, well,
Yeah.
a lot of people just
It's
don't like the
nasty.
taste. Yeah, it does seem to have, it has an artificial flavor, like sweetener kind of taste to it. To me, it always tasted like
It's
aspartame or something like that.
yeah, and it kind of lingers in your mouth too afterwards. Like I
Yeah.
don't want that taste to be in my mouth after I drink a cup of tea.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And I think, yeah, it kind of like, the news that it was like that so much of it is actually genetically modified, which I will go into the details on that in a bit, but I think it kind of, for me anyway, it was kind of like, when I hear about genetically modified things, it's like, a lot of times I feel this real sense of loss because it's like, okay, well, that food, you can't really eat it anymore. And in a lot of cases, it might be something I'm not really eating anyway, but then they're going to be feeding it to animals and that kind of thing. So it's just trying to avoid it becomes more and more difficult all the time. But with stevia, I was
Mm.
kind of like, ah, oh well. I wasn't crushed, but
Yeah.
that's just me.
Well, and it's interesting too. They talk about in the very beginning of the article about how, despite hundreds of years of safe use of stevia, in the traditional plant form, like we see behind Doug there,
Mm,
that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration labeled stevia leaf and the crude stevia extract as unsafe food additives, and it was granted GRAS, that generally regarded as safe status, to certain high purity steviol glycosides only.
yeah.
So this
So
kind of buyer beware is interesting because the devil is in the details as always.
yeah. Well, the interesting thing about it is that the way that they're genetically modifying this, it's not that they've actually made genetically modified stevia plants. It's that what they've done is they have produced a yeast through genetic modification that will produce those what are they called, rebiocides or rebaudiocides or something like that.
Uh-huh.
That it basically the compounds in stevia that make it sweet. They've managed to manipulate the genetics of a yeast to produce those compounds. So when they
It's
label, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Rebaudioside A
Rebaudiocide.
or Rebaudioside. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Sorry.
Yeah, neither am I. But basically, what they've done is they've had these. They've genetically modified these yeast to make this stuff. So when they label something as stevia, a lot of times it's not like even really technically stevia. It's like the stevia extract, but it's not even a stevia extract because it's not extracted from stevia. It's an artificial creation of the same stuff that you find in stevia. So it's really an artificial sweetener, despite the fact that they keep on like calling it natural,
Mhm.
or like basically capitalizing off this idea that it's a healthy plant, but there is no plant that's in this product.
Yeah, it's like similar to kind of like a pharmaceutical. So
Hmm.
essentially what they do is they isolate the compound or the kind of the very chemical that is responsible for inducing the sweet taste or the sweet flavor. I mean, this is 100 times sweeter than sugar, right?
Hmm.
So it's extraordinarily sweet, especially anyone who's tried this knows that you can't go too heavy on the stevia because it's remarkably sweet. But what they've done is they've taken this natural plant, like all other kind of herb, herbs, traditionally used herbs that have been used perhaps for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They take this one compound or this chemical, and then they kind of rebrand that or reclassify that and kind of there's always going to be problems, I think, to some extent, or you're always going to run the risk of coming against problems when you isolate a specific chemical from the
Totally.
plant. And this is what you see generally with big pharma is what they do, for instance, aspirin. So you've got the original plant, which was
White willow,
um,
white willow
the white
bark.
willow bark. Yeah, white willow bark. And so they saw that it had some of these properties. And so what they do is they actually derive the acetyl salicylic acid from that, and then they've made aspirin. And unfortunately, aspirin, whilst it does have many good effects, it also does have some pretty nasty side effects long term use.
Mhm.
So it seems to be the case. This might be partially what's going on here.
Yeah, I think because the thing about when you take an herb, a whole herb, um, like white willow bark, say, it still has those pain killing properties, but there are natural compounds in there that buffer it and make it so the
Mhm.
negative effects don't actually come through. So, like a good example, actually, Elliot, bringing up aspirin, because I mean that one has nasty effects on the gastrointestinal tract. Essentially, it can cause like bleeding, ulceration, that sort of thing. Aspirin can, but white willow bark doesn't have that. It doesn't cause that. Um,
Mhm.
the reason being, at least the theorized reason being, is that there's other compounds in there that counteract that negative effect. So I think that, especially in situations where it's in some kind of herbal remedy that's been used for generations, thousands of years, it stood the test of time. And chances are, even if there are negative effects from these isolated compounds, they don't exist in the whole herb. So yeah, it's like you're saying, Elliot. Like anytime that they're isolating these things, there are risks. You can't just be like, well, we found the active component and that's all we need. In a lot of cases, that's not all you need.
So only the isolates are approved by
Yeah.
the FDA. And who has the power to make the isolates besides the large food companies like Cargill?
Yeah.
Like
Cargill's the
your
one.
average person, yeah, they're going to use the whole leaf. And it has been used like for centuries.
Yeah.
Well, Cargill was voted one of the most evil companies on earth.
Yeah.
Notoriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're even calling it what non-artificial, even though it's GE created. Like that's kind of why I think this article came out, because there's so many different variations of it. Like I had a list here. I know Damien just showed a picture of Truvia, but they're making all kinds of stuff out of it. And what are some of the, just for our listeners who are interested, sweet leaf, purevia, stevia in the raw, truvia, and I can't remember what the other one was. There was, so with consumerists, like you said in the beginning, Doug, wanting to cut down on sugar, and then you hear, oh, well, this is stevia, it's a leaf, it's natural.
Mm,
All the different names should be looked at too, to check the ingredients, because
for sure, check the ingredients. Yeah, because a lot of the times, stevia, if it's even in there, is a small component of actually what the whole thing, like what the entire product is. And in fact, we've got a video from Dr. Berg about it. It's just a short piece. Maybe we can play that right now, Damien.
Sure. Hang on.
Yeah, he basically just goes into some of the different brands and what kind of stuff is in there.
Start reading the labels very carefully because of the assumption that just because something is keto friendly, like stevia, it's healthy, right? Well, on a lot of the brands out there, they'll have things like maltodextrin. Now that is an oxymoron because you're buying stevia to go low sugar, right? When the actual stevia in it has the absolute highest type of sweetener on the glycemic index of all the sweeteners, maltodextrin. I think it's like 110. I mean, think about like sucrose. That is 65. Glucose is 100. Maltodextrin is over like 110. So it's going to definitely spike your blood sugars. So you really want to make sure it doesn't say maltodextrin or dextrose or dextrin, any of those types of sweeteners. Now that's stevia in the raw. Sweet leaf has inulin, which is fine for most people, but it can create some bloating. And then you have better stevia, organic cane alcohol. Well, I'm not sure you want to consume that. Then you have pure stevia, which is organic stevia and natural flavors. One little point about natural flavorings is many times they will use GMO ingredients. So you want to make sure if it's a natural flavoring that it's non-GMO. But for the most part, if you can just get stevia by itself, it's going to be okay. Ideally, it'd be great if you can get stevia that's actually green. It's not turned into this white powder, which they use certain chemicals to bleach it. And of course, they don't need to put those chemicals on the label if it's under 1/2 gram. But they do use chemicals to process stevia to get rid of that aftertaste. On some people, they're going to react to it. Most people are not going to be sensitive to it, so it's not a big deal. But realize that if you do react to it, chances are you're not going to react to the actual stevia plant if you grow it or if you buy it in an actual green powder. Personally, I don't like stevia in my coffee. I think it's good in a liquid form in certain types of carbonated beverages. Other people like to bake with it. But the point about this video is just because something is so-called keto friendly doesn't mean that it's really keto friendly if it has things like this in it. Thanks for watching. So if you want more knowledge on how to create a healthy body, subscribe now.
Cut that. You don't need his promotion. It's interesting though because essentially a lot of the sweeteners out there and a lot of the stevia ones in particular, you still have to read your labels. In a lot of cases, like I know people would really like to have an easy time with these things, and when they're trying to avoid sugar, all they have to do is pick up a bottle of stevia. But honestly, you always have to read the labels. Like there's no such thing as things that are just plain safe.
And the thing,
Yeah.
sorry, I was going to say one of the things to consider with taking a 0-calorie sweetener is, it may physically contain 0 calories, but the problem is that the effect that is having on certain parts of the brain or on other systems in the body, particularly the bugs in the gut, the dopaminergic system in the brain, in the nervous system, which is involved in appetite regulation, which is involved in weight deposition, how well you are operating your metabolism. This hasn't really been fleshed out, right? There's some research to suggest that, okay, these non-caloric sweeteners may be having a similar effect on our hormones as sugar would. And there actually may be a bit of a mismatch here because unlike if you were to eat some sugar or refined carbohydrate, yes, you would get the hormones associated with what happens when you eat sugar, such as insulin and various other ones. But that would be those hormones would be appropriately released because you have intaken some sugar, right? So your body knows how to process that to some extent. Not good in long term, but actually you can burn sugar pretty well, and you know what to do with it, right? With these non-caloric sweeteners, some of the time what you're actually doing is telling the brain that you are intaking sugar or carbohydrate when there is no carbohydrate or sugar actually being eaten. And so that can cause a real kind of hormonal imbalance to a large extent. Now, I've been reading one paper, interesting one. It was looking at the isolated, what is it, ribaldicide. What did I say it was? It's basically that
or a biodicide.
Yeah, it's referred to as Reb A. Basically, the sweet chemical found in stevia. So this isolated Reb A, what they've done is they've actually fed this to a group of rats. What they found is that it can actually have an effect on gene expression in certain parts of the brain, the mesolimbic reward center, and it's having an effect on certain microbes in the gut. Okay. And what it's doing to the microbes in the gut is it actually induces them to make high levels of certain short-chain fatty acids. This is basically byproducts of their metabolism. So they produce these fatty acids called acetate and valerate. Now, these were positively correlated with fat mass and total weight. So although the stevia may not contain any calories, just taking in a bunch of this really sweet compound is having an effect not only on the brain, but also on the microbes, which cause the microbes to produce certain fatty acids, which then go on to affect our metabolism in a way that might promote weight gain. So you're not necessarily safe just because you're dodging the sugar. Actually, the chemicals that you're having can be messing up with your metabolism in a variety of ways. And it's way more complex than just taking in more calories or less calories. Did that make sense?
Yeah. No, it absolutely did. And in fact, there's actually a couple of other things that are kind of wrong with stevia. For one thing, I mean, I think it's the same kind of mechanism you're talking about there, Elliot. In fact, you might have already mentioned it, and I apologize if I'm repeating you, but that it actually can lead to actually eating more later. Did you cover that already?
No.
Because apparently one of the things that happens is that because you've kind of tasted this sweetness and are setting your body up to receive calories, and then it doesn't receive any calories, it sets up for cravings because suddenly your body's like, where are those calories? And it starts wanting more. So a number of people, I was looking up quite a few different articles and stuff about people talking about kind of the dark side of stevia. And a number of people actually report that they were eating bigger outside of that stevia that they were having. So if they were putting stevia in their tea or having it in their smoothie in the morning or something like that, they found that they were actually eating more later on. So yeah, it can lead to kind of overeating as well. But probably the biggest shocker that we were just talking about before the show actually was finding out that traditional cultures, I believe it was in South America, actually were at one time using stevia as a form of birth control. So yeah, and there was a study done that, you know, a lot of people out there are like, oh, well, it hasn't been replicated yet, so we don't really know, but I think it's enough to kind of invoke the precautionary principle. Saying that when they were feeding it to rats, they found, like, it was something, I don't have it up in front of me, but it was something like a 50% drop in fertility. It might have even been more than that.
Yeah, it was
I think that was right.
57 to 79%.
To 79. So there you go. Right. So, I mean, apparently stevia, the molecule actually is very close to a structure of like hormones. So they theorize that maybe that's what's going on there. But I don't think that anybody who wants to sweeten their tea in the morning is really looking for to become infertile. So, and this isn't something that's widely kind of publicized. So I think it's something like if somebody's trying to has anybody ever heard if you're trying to conceive to stop taking stevia? I've never heard of that before. So
No, I've never heard of it. But I did read an article about a woman who was using stevia. and she stopped having her period. And then
Yeah.
when she cut out the stevia, like a month later, her period came back.
Yeah, I think there's actually been quite a few cases of that.
Mhm.
I mean, if you look at stevia, I think it's quite a potent phytoestrogen.
Mm.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what
pretty
it said.
sure.
That studies have shown a dramatic effect on estrogen and progesterone and have a contraceptive effect on the body. They're calling them steviol glycosides.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so. I mean, I guess what it comes down to is there's no free lunch.
Mhm.
You think you found this miracle sweetener or something like that, and and also, Elliot, you'd be interested to know. Apparently, stevia is quite high in oxalate.
Yeah, yeah. If you're having the whole leaf, it is definitely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like I say, there's no real free lunch out there. I personally have come to a place where my diet is good enough that I don't really crave sweets so much. And as an occasional treat, if I'm going to have something, I just use like a natural form of sugar. Like I'll use honey or cane sugar or something like that. I don't think once in a while it's really going to kill you. And using this artificial stuff, yeah, I don't know. I've done my time with that stuff, and I don't want anything to do with it. Xylitol, erythritol, stevia, all those ones, they're just, I'm done with them.
Yeah, if you have to have a PhD in research science to figure out whether or not you should take an artificial sweetener, you probably just shouldn't do it. Like people, like you said, it's people think they've come across this wonder drug. Like the whole reason that people are taking artificial sweeteners, like maybe they've gone keto or maybe they've gone carnivore, and they want to one, lose weight, and two, stop the sugar cravings.
Mhm.
And you find out that it does neither of those things. You can still gain weight because it can spike your blood sugar, because if your brain senses sweet, it's going to do what the brain does when it senses sweet. And, if you, I forgot where I was going with the other part, but, yeah,
You were
you can't,
saying kill sugar cravings and lose weight.
yeah, and you still get sugar cravings. You want to eat sweets all the time. So what is the point of taking it? Just act like the stuff doesn't exist, or just use honey or use raw cane sugar or something. Use a real sugar, because your body knows what to do with that. If I'm mostly carnivore, but if I cheat and eat something with sugar in it, I'll just get really, really hot at night. It might sweat a little bit because I ate too much sugar.
Yeah.
But, the next day I'm probably back in ketosis. Not that I ever check my keto strips or anything, or check my blood for it, but stop thinking that you're cheating something. You're not.
Yeah. It's not a
Yeah.
viable hack.
No.
Exactly. And I think unless you've got some kind of like medical condition, which really means that you need to completely, withdraw from all dietary carbohydrates, all dietary sugars and things, the body can burn glucose, it can burn glucose and fat. It's why our body makes glucose.
Yeah.
We can burn it and we can do things with it. We know how to process it. Yeah, okay, we eat too much of it and it shouldn't be like it shouldn't be a regular thing, but actually a little bit of sugar here and there, unless you're like a type 1 diabetic with uncontrolled insulin requirements or you're epileptic or something, it's not going to kill you. But actually taking these kind of very, I guess what you'd call kind of abstract, random compounds like sugar alcohols, like xylitol. I mean, it's derived from tree bark and it's a potent antibiotic. You can actually do some damage to your gut from taking too much xylitol. Like there's loads of people who get really adverse symptoms from taking xylitol or erythritol. Like erythritol is like a kind of, a lot of these things are synthetic nowadays as well, just like the stevia. So it's like, yeah, there's no free lunch. If you're going to eat something sweet, you need to deal with the consequences of that. And a lot of the time, there's not
Exactly.
that many consequences if it's just one time,
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're reasonably healthy, it's not going to kill you to have an occasional blood sugar spike. Your body should be able to handle it. It knows what to do.
Yeah. The other thing is too that when you really do kind of cut down on sugar, or any kind of sweetness, you start to notice like the natural sweetness of natural foods. Like you don't need that sugar hit. You know what I mean? That thing that we're so used to now with our processed foods and all these kinds of things. That really really sweet taste. It's kind of like that. That starts to become overpowering, and you don't even like it anymore. And the natural sweetness of natural foods tends to kind of like be more enjoyable, I guess.
Yeah,
Well, I think
indeed.
this is where companies like Cargill, they're like a huge food conglomerate, and a lot of people know them for grain production. But I think that this ramping up of this commercial production of these genetically engineered sweeteners, and their product is EverSweet. They just built a $50 million production facility to make this stuff just in November. You know what I mean? So they're really looking to find a way to make money on the fact that people are coming to the idea that maybe all this carbs and sweet is not good for them, and dealing with obesity and health issues. But these guys are trying to situate themselves right there in the market to continue to get their market share, even though this stuff is evil.
Yeah.
Well, there's a sucker born every minute. Some people are always going to get taken in by food manufacturers' lies. So it's still up to everyone to do their own research. Like, even if you have the slightest suspicion, it's not going to kill you to not have a little bit of sweetness
Totally.
every single day. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need, just because they're serving cake doesn't mean you have to have the cake. Like, really, it's just kind of you graciously turn it down and then that's it.
Yeah.
I think, having a little bit of willpower about these things obviously goes a long way.
hmm And also, eating enough like fatty meat really cuts down on any kind of sweet cravings.
Mhm.
So if you can find some kind of natural hack through your own diet, whether it be like not eating sweet stuff, just not to awaken the beast, or having more fat in your meals to cut down on cravings, and try it, see what works.
Yeah. Well, I think, is there anything more to say about stevia?
Buyer beware.
Buyer beware. Yeah.
Or
Read your
Truvia.
It's
Yeah.
the unnecessary non-caloric sweetener. All right,
Yeah.
folks. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks to my fellow hosts. Be sure to like and subscribe the video. Share it around with all your friends. Anybody who's eaten stevia.
And had a bad experience.
Or not. Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah, and be sure to join us next time. We'll have another fantastic show for y'all. So until next time, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.